Okay, welcome back to video 3. Let's start by looking at the title. So I'm going to use my vocabulary colour for that one. So a couple of things that are quite interesting with the title. I think tense is the first thing that I pick up on. What were? And there's a sadness, I think, to that word because it's in past tense. It's gone. Something that's gone, a people that's gone. So it really does link to that tone of sadness there, doesn't it? And it makes this question rhetorical because if these people are gone, if this culture has gone, who is going to be able to answer that question? So again, links to that sadness, that loss and that regret. I think I'm going to acknowledge that there. That it almost makes that question rhetorical because we will never be able to find out that answer. We can't know for sure. I think another interesting word that's been used there is this third person. So remember, first person is I, when you involve the reader, I, us, we. Second person is you. Third person when you're talking about others, they, them, their. And it's quite ambiguous, isn't it? And I think on purpose this represents, yes, it's talking about the Vietnamese war, but I think from a broader perspective, there's a recognition that war has cost many nations, many cultures, many people. So I think this third person, and it's quite collective, more than one. So a loss of many. Again, there's sadness there, isn't there? And we said there that it could be any culture, which is kind of making me think back to war photographer when we were talking about that arbitrary nature of suffering and who, you know, the randomness of who survives and who doesn't. Here, which cultures survive, which don't, who gets to make that decision, I think is reflected in this poem here. Okay. All right, so let's move on from the title and let's have a look at the first question and the first answer. So I said I was going to do it one and one so that we can have a look and see what the answer is like in comparison to the question. All right, so did the people of Vietnam use lanterns of stone? So this question here is, again, I'm sticking with my vocabulary colour. Lanterns of stone. There's a recognition here of maybe a not as advanced culture, not as an advanced nation or a developing nation where they've not particularly got much technology. So already potentially as a reader I'm building up sympathy for a culture that has less technology and maybe less advances in ways of protecting themselves. And I've got that just from that word stone there. So less developed, maybe lacking technology. Perhaps depending, and here's where it depends who's saying this question, is there criticism here, is it patronising, or is there sadness from this question, or is it just asking factually? So lots of different inferences there depending again on the attitude of the speaker and who the speaker is. So I might put a couple of, is it patronising? Are they saying it in a patronising way? Are they saying it factually? Is there sadness there? Is there, you know, that looking down on someone, or they didn't have what we had? All tied up in this because the lanterns, it's not electricity. A recognition that maybe didn't have enough money. There's no wealth there. Okay, let's have a look at the answer to number 1 then. So, sir, their light hearts turned to stone. It's not remembered whether in gardens, stone lanterns, loom in pleasant ways. I think the first word to pick up on is sir, which gives us a little hint of the relationship between the questioner and the responder, because if someone's responding in sir, there's respect there. And I think that's why potentially we think it could be someone junior or someone less than in response. So the responder is maybe someone junior. someone that is speaking up to somebody else. There's definitely an imbalance, isn't there, in terms of the questioner and the responder, and perhaps that's reflected in the poet's intentions. There's an imbalance between the people that attacked, the Americans that brought the guns and technology, and the Vietnamese people who didn't have anything. There's an imbalance of power, which potentially means an imbalance of justice, maybe. And does that link to the intention of the unfairness of the war? And remember, these are my inferences, and you don't have to take any of these. They're just my suggestions only. Okay, so I'm going to definitely pick up on this key image that's been used here, this metaphor. Their light hearts turned to stone. I think it's a key quote that I would try and remember for this poem. I've definitely advised previous year 11s to use this and remember this one. When you think of, so this is a metaphor, when you think of light hearts, I think of innocence. They've not got anything dangerous in their lives. They're quite calm people. They don't mean any harm. There's love there. It's all very positive in this light heart imagery. And then we get this contrast on purpose, don't we? Light, and then we get the stone, which is reflected in the question, which is quite interesting. Stone was used up here, but actually it's not the lanterns that this responder wants to talk about. They want to talk about the image of the stone not being about wealth, but being more about death. You know, it's killed the innocence, the calmness, the love. Now it's death, it's cold. Like a relic, a stone, it makes me think of something that is, you know, like a fossil, like someone will come across it in years' time and it's part of history now, as opposed to like living and carrying on. So there's sadness in that as well. So there's kind of that idea of history. This culture is gone, it's in the past. There's that regret, I think, that's coming through. I think it's important that there's a recognition here of it's not remembered, which links back to our title. We can't know for sure. We don't know what this culture did. We don't know whether these people had stone lanterns. But what is interesting is the choice of the adjective. So even though they said it's not remembered, which holds that sadness, it's interesting that they don't choose to focus on the fact that they had stone lanterns, but more this adjective here, pleasant ways. And I think this use of this adjective here is linking back to the type of culture that's been destroyed. Pleasant, these people were good people. They were good to everyone, they were nice to everyone, they were pleasant. The need to destroy this culture was not necessary. I think there's that hidden, or maybe better to say subtle, way of viewing that intention there. Subtle way of saying they're good people, they didn't deserve to be hurt, or their culture destroyed in any way. Okay, we're on 9 minutes. Let's try and do number 2. Okay. Did they hold ceremonies to reverence the opening of buds? So it's probably worth me giving you the definition of this word here in case you're not sure. So reverence means respect for something. So the question that's being asked there is, did they hold ceremonies to pray for the opening of buds? So this is linking back to perhaps an old tradition of living off the land, hoping for the seasons to bring good crops. There is that sense of a simple life in that question, isn't there? And religion, obviously we're getting this theme of religion from ceremonies and reverence. Simple life, we've got the religious aspect here. And again, it's making me think back to the destruction of Sennacherib, which pits this man-made, technology-driven or weapons-driven against the Jewish people who only had nature. So we've kind of got a similar setup here, where instead of the people from Jerusalem in the destruction of Sennacherib, here we've got this group of quite simple, religious, good Vietnamese people being attacked by people who have a lot more wealth and technology to destroy, perhaps. Let's have a look at the answer to this one. Perhaps they gathered once to delight in blossom, but after their children were killed, there were no more buds. So look how the responder uses the image of buds here. And it's to reflect the children. So if you think about what buds represents, so buds is something that is new, that is young, that is innocent. And I think that's reflected here in the children. There were no more buds because there were no more children. So almost like they go hand in hand. Here the children were killed. And I think that line there is meant to really pull out that feeling of sadness, loss, grief. It was the children that were killed as well, which is the continuation of a culture, isn't it, in the children? So no continuing of culture. There's the sadness there, the children and the buds remember. And it's stated as well in this verb, they were killed. Now it's quite blunt, but I think we definitely get that image is quite strong there. And we get a couple more references to this idea that they were good people, simple people. They delighted in the flowers. Maybe they were happy to see flowers blooming. What's wrong with that? That's a nice thing. Again, there's that idea linking back to pleasant and delight. We're definitely getting this semantic field of good people, which you could talk about again in the macro, about the overall imagery that's used to represent the Vietnamese people. I might put that at the top actually as a reminder for myself if I was writing about this poem. That idea of goodness, of being good. Okay, I'm going to pause this video there because it is getting on for 13 minutes, and we'll have a look at the next two questions in the next video.